Imagine walking into, like, a stifling, crowded room in the dead of summer.
Oh.
Yeah, and this is sometime in the 1830s, right?
Uh,
The air is just incredibly thick.
I can picture it.
And at the very front of the room, positioned directly below this massive, towering pulpit, is a wooden bench.
Just a bench.
Just an empty wooden bench. But everyone in the room is staring at it.
Right.
And the man at the front is pacing, and his voice is rising and falling in this almost hypnotic, rhythmic cadence.
Setting the mood, basically.
Exactly. He's telling stories of hellfire, of sudden death, of neighbors who waited 1 second too long to make a choice and perished.
Sounds intense.
Oh, the emotional temperature in the room is dialed up to an absolute boiling point. People are weeping out loud. Some are literally groaning.
Wow.
And the man points directly at that empty wooden seat, which he calls the anxious bench, and demands that anyone who wants to alter their eternal destiny right this very second must walk down the aisle.
They have to get up in front of everyone.
They have to sit in the hot seat, and they have to break. You have to make a radical, paradigm-shifting decision, and you have to do it right now.
It's an incredibly intense scene to visualize.
Yeah.
And the wild thing is, it wasn't a fringe event. That psychological pressure cooker, it essentially became the blueprint for a massive swath of modern religious experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, okay, let's fast forward to today. You wake up on an average Tuesday, you grab a cup of coffee, and you open your phone.
Right, a totally normal morning.
Nobody's yelling at you to sit on a wooden bench, right?
Yeah.
But the psychological pressure is oddly identical.
Oh, 100%.
Every influencer, every targeted ad, every motivational speaker is screaming the exact same underlying message. Like, you need to be extraordinary. You need to live this epic life.
You have to disrupt your industry.
Yes. You must be a trailblazer. Your relationships must be Instagram perfect.
Yeah.
And your spiritual life needs to be a series of continuous burning bush revelations.
It is completely exhausting.
It really is. We are marinating in this cultural anxiety that, if our lives aren't a highlight reel of world-altering moments, we are fundamentally failing.
The pressure to be radical has essentially become the water we swim in.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. What if that relentless demand to be extraordinary is actually the very thing destroying us?
That is the million-dollar question.
What if the most profound, earth-shattering transformations don't happen in the explosive crisis moments, but in the quiet, completely mundane routines?
Right.
We are looking at a sweeping array of historical and theological material today to explore a concept from historic Christianity known as the ordinary means of grace.
And I have to say, this material is dense, it's provocative, and it spans centuries.
It's a huge stack of sources today.
Yeah, we'll be looking at the 16th century Protestant Reformation, the intense reverence of the 17th century Puritans, the wild frontier revivals of the 19th century.
Where that anxious bench comes from.
Exactly. All the way to modern sociological data analyzing today's megachurches.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. And now, before we really get into the weeds, I want to establish some ground rules for our discussion today.
Always a good idea.
The history we are unpacking involves some fierce, centuries-old theological combat. We are going to examine historic Calvinism, we'll look at Pelagianism, Tridentine Catholicism, and the mechanics of modern evangelicalism.
Basically, the heavy hitters of church history.
Right. But our role today is strictly analytical. We are not here to endorse one specific theology over another, nor are we taking sides in these historical schisms.
Right, we're just looking at the texts.
Exactly. We are impartially unpacking the arguments, the historical shifts, and the psychological mechanisms behind them, so you, the listener, can understand how these ideas completely rewired the modern mind.
We are mapping the territory, not planting a flag.
Precisely.
So let's start by diagnosing this modern exhaustion we mentioned. There is an acute restlessness documented in these modern critiques of the Western Church.
A pervasive yearning for the spectacular.
Yeah. And Tish Harrison Warren, one of the authors in this stack, makes an observation that I found incredibly arresting.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
She points out that for a modern person, making a radical lifestyle change like giving away all your clothes or moving across the country to join some edgy, off-the-grid community.
The really loud, visible stuff.
Right. That actually requires less real courage than the mundane task of being kind to your spouse on an average Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
Or, calling a lonely parent back when you were just dead tired from work.
It sounds totally counterintuitive at first glance.
It does.
But when you analyze the psychology of it, it makes perfect sense. The radical choice comes with an immediate, intoxicating rush of adrenaline.
Oh, for sure.
It provides an instant identity marker. If you move across the world, you get social applause, you get a compelling narrative to tell about yourself.
You get a great bio for your social media.
Exactly. But the ordinary Wednesday morning, there is zero applause. Nobody is handing you an award for quietly doing the dishes or, controlling your temper in traffic.
Right.
The psychological burden of the modern age is that we've engineered an environment where we are addicted to the adrenaline of the radical. And that makes the quiet endurance of the ordinary feel like a failure.
Like you're missing out. We've created a restlessness. With the restlessness itself, people are just burning out, secretly wondering if it is permissible to just live a normal, quiet life.
The history provides this fascinating counter-narrative to that burnout.
Yeah, take William Carey, for example. In the late 1700s, this guy essentially birthed the modern missionary movement.
A massively influential figure.
Right. His work in India triggered an unprecedented era of global expansion. You look at a guy like that, and you assume his internal life was just a nonstop fireworks show of divine inspiration and radical breakthroughs.
Yet Carey vehemently rejected that characterization.
He really did.
He famously told his future biographers that if they wanted to describe him accurately, they must simply call him a plodder.
A plodder.
That was his chosen identifier. He claimed he owed everything to his simple, unglamorous ability to plod, to basically persevere in ordinary tasks day after day, year after year.
Okay, I have to push back on Carey's self-assessment here, though.
Go for it.
Isn't plodding just a polite, romanticized word for being stuck in a rut?
Well,
I mean, if I tell my boss I'm just going to plod through the next quarter, I'm probably getting fired.
yeah.
How does doing the exact same boring thing every single day lead to a revolution? It sounds like the definition of stagnation.
I get that, and it's a vital distinction to make here. Plodding, in Carey's context, and really in the context of historic orthodox theology, is not empty repetition or mindless stagnation.
Okay.
The theological argument in our sources is that the divine does not operate erratically,
Meaning what exactly?
meaning the supernatural doesn't bypass the natural order in a chaotic, unpredictable frenzy. Instead, it operates through consistent, appointed channels.
Okay, so it has a structure.
Right. So the plodding is a steadfast, intentional devotion to the specific avenues where divine grace has been promised to flow.
I see.
If you look back at the apostolic accounts of the early Christian church, the sources note they didn't experience explosive growth because they were constantly inventing trendy new methodologies or throwing massive spectacles.
They weren't like rebranding every 6 months.
Exactly. The accounts say they devoted themselves daily to very routine practices.
Yeah.
The apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and prayer.
I just showed up and did the basics.
Just the basics.
And the implication of this is massive. If you are listening right now and feeling crushed by the weight of your own potential.
It really is.
If true, lasting growth is actually ordinary. It completely removes the demand to orchestrate your own spectacular breakthrough by 9 a.m. every day.
You don't have to be the trailblazing phoenix of your generation.
Right. The extraordinary is a byproduct of the mundane. But to understand the mechanics of how this plotting actually works, we have to look under the hood.
We do.
We need to look at the architectural framework these historical figures were using. Which brings us to this incredibly specific phrase, the means of grace.
Right. We need to clearly define what we mean here. Because in systematic Reformed, Lutheran, and historic confessional theology, the means of grace are not just self-improvement habits.
They aren't life hacks.
Exactly. This isn't about drinking matcha, keeping a gratitude journal, and doing morning yoga.
As great as those things might be for your blood pressure.
Sure, yeah. But theologically, the means of grace are strictly defined as specific, objective channels instituted by Christ in the church.
And those are?
Namely, the Word, the sacraments, and prayer.
Okay. Word, sacraments, prayer.
The foundational premise is rooted in divine sovereignty. The logic dictates that because God is sovereign over the ultimate end goal, which is salvation and human sanctification, He alone has the authority to ordain the specific instruments to achieve that goal.
So the church doesn't get to just make things up.
Exactly. The church is not at liberty to act like a tech startup, inventing its own novel mechanisms or algorithms for spiritual growth.
I really want to break this down using covenant theology, because when I was reading through how these historical catechisms frame this, it reminded me of physical infrastructure.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Let's think of it like a city's water grid. You can sit in your house and have a deep, private, emotional desire for water. You can sit there and meditate on the concept of hydration.
But you're still going to be thirsty.
Exactly. If you want actual water, you have to physically turn the tap that is connected to the objective plumbing infrastructure of the city.
Right.
Covenant theology treats the means of grace like that plumbing. It prevents faith from becoming this overly spiritualized, abstract feeling trapped in your own head.
It anchors it in reality.
Yes, in physical social realities.
Yeah.
You literally have to show up to a physical community alongside other flawed people to receive tangible things. Spoken words, water, bread, wine.
The physical infrastructure analogy is perfect. It grounds the transcendent in the material. And we see this infrastructure meticulously mapped out in historical documents.
Like the Westminster Shorter Catechism.
Exactly, from the 17th century. Westminster approaches the means of grace as a matter of systematic constitutional law. It rigorously defines the outward and ordinary means as the word, sacraments, and prayer.
It's very analytical.
Highly analytical, categorizing exactly how the system is constructed.
But then you look at the Heidelberg Catechism, which was written a bit earlier, and it comes at the exact same infrastructure from a totally different angle.
It does.
It reads less like a constitution and more like a pastoral curriculum for a terrified peasant in the 1500s.
That's a good description.
It asks this deeply human question: where does faith come from? And it answers that the Holy Spirit produces it by the preaching of the gospel and confirms it by the use of the sacrament.
It's much warmer.
Right. What I find so compelling is that whether you are looking at the cold, systematic logic of Westminster or the warm, pastoral tone of Heidelberg, both are absolutely united in their total reliance on the ordinary.
They are unified in the architecture, and within that architecture, there is a very strict hierarchy that we need to understand.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, the theologian Gerhardus Voss articulates this brilliantly in our sources. Voss argued for the absolute, non-negotiable priority of the word over the sacraments.
Let's do an explain, like a five here. When Voss says the word, what exactly does he mean in this context?
He means the scriptures, specifically as they are read and faithfully preached aloud.
Okay, so the Bible preached.
Right. Voss posited that you can entirely conceive of the word operating as a complete, efficacious means of grace, even if a sacrament is nowhere to be found.
Okay.
But it is theologically impossible to conceive of a sacrament functioning as a means of grace without the word.
Because, and tell me if I'm tracking here, if a guy in robes just dunks you in a river, but nobody has ever explained the scriptures or the gospel to you, you didn't receive a sacrament.
You did not.
You just took a weird, unexpected bath.
Exactly.
The physical elements, the water, the bread, are completely meaningless without the truth of the word assigning them their meaning.
That's precisely it. The sacraments are inherently subordinate. They are dependent upon the scriptures. They are physical seals placed upon the spoken promise.
Wow.
And this hierarchy, this reliance on the objective truth of the word, extends directly into how they viewed prayer as well.
This was a total light bulb moment for me when reading the sources.
Yeah.
If the whole system relies on the word, then prayer isn't just you closing your eyes and manifesting your desires to the universe.
Right, it's not the secret.
No. Prayer only functions as a means of grace when it is actively shaped, bounded, and informed by the objective truth of Scripture.
Exactly.
If you are just ranting your own unexamined anxieties or selfish wishes into the void, you aren't engaging the infrastructure.
You're just talking to yourself.
Right. The historical theology argues that the Holy Spirit takes the objective word, illuminates your mind, and enables you to pray back in accordance with what is actually true.
So the efficacy of the prayer does not rely on your emotional intensity. It relies on its alignment with the objective promises of God.
That is a huge relief, honestly.
It is, but it also introduces a massive tension. Because if the power resides in the objective channel rather than the human's internal emotional state, human nature will inevitably try to game the system.
Of course we will.
Right. What happens when people start treating these objective channels not as a relational covenant, but as automatic magic spells?
Which takes us right to the powder keg of the 16th century Protestant Reformation.
It does indeed.
Because the Reformers weren't just writing theology in a vacuum. They were actively fighting a system they believed had turned the means of grace into exactly that, an automated vending machine.
And to understand the Reformers, you have to understand the medieval ecclesiastical machine they were opposing.
Set the stage for us.
This view is famously codified by the Council of Trent, which was the Catholic Church's massive counter-response to the Reformation. Trent solidified the doctrine of ex opere operato.
Literally translated,
Right.
by the work performed.
Correct. The Council of Trent dictated that the correct formal administration of a sacrament by an ordained priest inherently contains and confers grace automatically.
Oh, automatically.
It is a mechanical operation. The grace is dispensed regardless of the internal faith or devotion of the person receiving it, provided the recipient doesn't actively, intentionally place a spiritual roadblock, which they called an obex, in the way.
Let's visualize this because it's wild. It means if I walk up and take the Eucharist, as long as the priest says the right Latin incantation and I'm not actively, consciously resisting God at that exact second, the grace is just deposited into my spiritual bank account.
That's the mechanical view, yes.
It's purely transactional.
Yeah.
And the Reformers looked at this automated view of grace and they were horrified.
They absolutely hated it.
They argued vehemently that the means of grace are not magical incantations. You cannot bypass the human heart and the Holy Spirit just by performing a ritual.
They viewed it as a profound distortion. Protestant theology maintained that these channels were entirely objective, meaning God really was working through them, but they insisted the efficacy was intrinsically tethered to two things:
Which are?
the sovereign, active illumination of the Holy Spirit, and the recipient actually receiving it with faith.
So you have to be engaged.
Right. Prior to this, the medieval church had expanded the sacraments to 7, embedding them into every facet of life from birth to death, often imbued with this mechanistic power that severely sidelined the actual preaching of the word.
And Martin Luther and John Calvin made it their mission to systematically dismantle that automated framework.
They took a wrecking ball to it.
I really want to dive into Martin Luther here because his psychological insight into the human condition is stunningly relevant for us today.
It really is.
Luther looked at the 7 sacraments and reduced them down to the 2 he saw explicitly mandated by Christ in the Bible.
Yeah.
Baptism and the Lord's Supper.
Right.
But he didn't just shrink the list. He completely re-anchored them to the gospel.
Yeah.
Luther recognized a core flaw in human psychology. We are chronically plagued by doubt.
Constant doubt.
And because of that doubt, we are always demanding spectacular signs from God. We want a burning bush. We want writing in the sky. We want a rush of pure emotional certainty to prove we are loved.
We crave undeniable, tangible proof.
Right. And Luther's genius was that he didn't scold people for wanting a sign. He didn't say, stop being weak, just have more faith.
Which is what a lot of modern advice sounds like.
Exactly. Instead, he looked at the terrified, doubting peasants and said, you already have the spectacular, tangible sign. God gave it to you. It's the sacraments.
He positioned them as physical, objective anchors in a sea of subjective doubt.
The history on this is just fascinating. When Luther was hit by severe bouts of depression or spiritual warfare, which the sources say he experienced intensely, he didn't try to solve it by whipping himself into a new emotional frenzy.
No, he didn't.
He didn't search his soul for a feeling of peace. He would literally shout out loud, I am baptized.
Just declaring it into the room.
He clung to a historical, physical event that happened to him. Think of it like a wedding ring.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
If you are married and you wake up on a random Thursday and you and your spouse are arguing, or you just feel totally emotionally disconnected, you don't have to spiral into an existential crisis about whether your marriage is real.
Right. You don't have to remarry them.
No. You don't have to manufacture romantic feelings to prove the marriage exists. You could just look at the metal band on your finger.
The physical evidence.
The ring is an objective, historical anchor that declares a covenant was made. Luther treated the water of baptism exactly like that metal ring.
That analogy captures the essence of Luther's pastoral care perfectly. Because the power derived from the objective promise of God, rather than the fluctuating temperature of human emotion, the solution to anxiety was a return to the ordinary.
Which is so relieving.
It is. If someone came to Luther in a panic about their salvation, his diagnostic question wasn't, have you had a radical spiritual awakening recently?
Right.
His diagnostic was, are you placing yourself under the faithful preaching of the word, and are you coming to the Lord's table to eat the bread by faith? He constantly drove people out of their own heads and back into the physical infrastructure.
Okay, so Luther anchors us with the physical sacraments. But then John Calvin comes along and applies this exact same objective weight to the actual sermon.
Yes, he does.
And Calvin's view of preaching is almost dizzying. He developed this concept of the sacramental word.
A very heavy concept.
He argued that when a totally normal, mortal human being stands up and faithfully preaches the truth, and that mortal speech is combined with the agency of the Holy Spirit, it ceases to be just the guy giving a lecture.
Right, it transforms.
It becomes the audible Eucharist. It becomes the very voice of God to the listener.
Calvin viewed this as one of the most astonishing miracles God performs. He believed that the consecration of human mouths, using frail, flawed, mortal vocal cords to declare divine truth, was the active instrument through which a person is united to Christ.
That is wild to think about.
For Calvin, the pulpit was not a place for didactic information transfer. It was a place of active spiritual communion. He insisted that in the preaching of the word, Christ himself must preside.
But, okay, practically speaking, I have to ask how this doesn't immediately backfire.
How so?
Well, if a congregation believes that the sermon is the audible Eucharist, doesn't that place an unbearable, crushing amount of pressure on the guy delivering it?
Ah, I see what you're saying.
Doesn't this theology accidentally invent the celebrity megachurch pastor? Because suddenly you need a guy with the charisma of a rock star to deliver the voice of God effectively.
That is the logical assumption, absolutely. But Calvin's theology actually prevents that entirely.
Really?
Because the efficacy, the actual power to transform the heart, is entirely the work of the Holy Spirit. So it is utterly independent of the minister's eloquence, intelligence, or charisma.
Okay, so the guy doesn't matter.
The minister is merely the plumbing, the Spirit is the water, and we know Calvin meant this practically because we have his liturgical blueprints.
Right, the Geneva rules.
Exactly. If you look at Calvin's 10 worship planning rules from Geneva, absolutely none of them involve platforming a superstar.
I was reviewing those 10 rules from the sources, and they are aggressively ordinary.
They really are.
It's things like ensuring the text of the scripture is read clearly, mandating that the congregation sing psalms in their own vernacular language so everyone actually understands what is coming out of their mouths.
Revolutionary for the time, but very practical.
Right. Using the Lord's Prayer as the structural backbone of the service. And my absolute favorite rule, manifesting the grace of the communion table by taking an offering to physically feed the poor in the city.
Tangible grace.
Yes. There are no smoke machines, no dramatic pauses, no manipulative lighting in these rules. The entire architecture was designed to make the minister invisible and the ordinary means unmistakable.
Precisely. The reformers successfully stripped away the mechanical magic of the medieval system, and they restored the absolute centrality of the word.
They reset the board.
They laid down a profound theological baseline. But history is a pendulum. And what we see in the 17th century is that the successors of the Reformation, the Puritans, took this framework, recognized its power, and pushed it to its absolute maximum limit.
We are entering the Puritan peak.
Yes, we are.
This is the era of the English and Scottish Puritans and major theological summits like the Synod of Dort. And these guys didn't just appreciate the ordinary means, they possessed an intense, almost terrifying reverence for them.
Terrifying is a good word for it.
The canons of Dort basically drop a theological hammer and say that if you try to separate the internal work of the Holy Spirit from the external, ordinary preaching of the Word, you are guilty of testing God.
They viewed it as the ultimate presumption.
Like you're challenging the Almighty.
Exactly. The Synod of Dort articulated that just as God's absolute sovereignty doesn't eliminate the reality of human decision-making, it also doesn't bypass the use of physical means. God ordains the ends and the means.
Okay.
Therefore, to casually dismiss or undermine the ordinary means of grace is to artificially separate the divine instrument from the divine agent.
Give us an analogy for that.
Well, if I can borrow from the medical field, it would be like praying desperately for a surgeon to remove a lethal tumor, but then physically barring the surgeon from bringing a scalpel into the operating room.
Oh, wow.
God heals, but he uses the scalpel.
And this reverence for the scalpel of preaching is perfectly captured in a story about an English Puritan named Jeremiah Burroughs.
This is a wild story.
It is. So Burroughs is preaching to his congregation, and he feels they aren't taking the sermon seriously enough.
Maybe they're yawning?
Right. Maybe people are drowsy. Maybe they're distracted. So to wake them up, he uses the Old Testament story of the Moabite king Eglon. Now, Eglon was not a good guy. He was a heathen king, an oppressor of the Israelites, famously described as a very, very fat pagan ruler.
Not a role model.
Definitely not. But Burroughs points out a specific detail in the text. When a messenger approaches Eglon and says, "I have a message from God for you," Eglon, this completely pagan enemy of God, is so struck by the gravity of the claim that he physically hoists himself out of his throne and stands at attention to receive the message.
Just out of pure respect for the concept of God.
Exactly. So Burroughs points this out to his church and basically says a pagan dictator had the decency to stand at attention when he heard the word God, and you people are slouching while the gospel is faithfully preached.
No, he shamed them.
He absolutely shamed them. To the Puritan mind, the pulpit was sacred ground.
It's a stark, visceral illustration. The Westminster theologians of that era operated on the conviction that faithful preaching was the primary, ordinary way God appointed for both the initial spark of faith and the ongoing increase of grace in a human life.
And because they believed this in their bones, it completely dictated their schedule.
It dictated the rhythm of their entire society.
Which finally explains a historical quirk that has always confused me. The double, or even triple, Sunday service.
Right, the grueling schedule.
If you grew up in a traditional church, you might remember having a Sunday morning service, a Sunday evening service, and Wednesday night prayer. For a long time, I just thought people in the past had no hobbies.
They just like sitting in pews.
Right. But through this theological lens, the intense schedule makes perfect logical sense. Let's go back to your medical analogy.
Okay.
If you are infected with a deadly terminal disease, and a doctor hands you the one specific synthesized medicine that will cure you and keep you alive, you don't just take a sip once a month when you're feeling sentimental.
No, you absolutely do not.
You take the maximum safe dose as often as prescribed. The Puritans believed the human soul was terminally ill with sin, and the ordinary means were the only synthesized cure.
So of course they wanted maximum exposure. Right. They wanted morning preaching, afternoon catechism, and evening sermons, because why on earth would you walk away from the medicine?
That is the exact internal logic of their liturgy. If the creator of the universe has cordoned off a specific day, the Sabbath, and designated specific channels to distribute life-altering grace, the rational response of the believer is to consume as much of it as possible.
It's just logical.
But human nature is notoriously fickle. The discipline required to maintain that level of deep, reverent engagement over generations is immense.
Yeah, people get tired.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The constant threat to the church is the slide toward pragmatism, the desire for a shortcut.
And that slide, that degradation of the infrastructure, is exactly what the renowned Dutch theologian Herman Bavinck slammed into when he visited America.
Yes, Bavinck's visits are legendary.
Bavinck comes to the United States in 1892 and again in 1908. He is a theological heavyweight, a guy deeply rooted in this rich Reformed tradition.
Right. He likely expects to find the vibrant, robust continuation of the Puritan legacy in the New World. Instead, he looks at the American church and is just utterly horrified.
Bavinck's cultural critique of American Presbyterianism in our sources is scathing.
He didn't hold back.
Not at all. He observed that the pulpit had been radically hollowed out. The preaching, which was supposed to be the audible Eucharist, had become intellectually and theologically thin.
He was watered down.
Very watered down. He wrote that the music wasn't reverent. He actually described it as distractingly vaudeville-esque.
Wow.
Furthermore, he noted that the sacraments were being sidelined. Baptism, instead of being the objective anchor Luther clung to, was increasingly treated as a mere afterthought or a sentimental photo opportunity.
Calling a church service vaudeville-esque in the late 19th century is a devastating insult.
It really is.
Vaudeville was cheap, variety show entertainment. It was juggling and slapstick. Bavinck is essentially saying, you traded the scalpel of God for a circus act.
He was completely disgusted.
But Bavinck was just observing the smoke, right? The explosion had happened decades earlier. A massive tectonic shift occurred in American religion between the height of the Puritans and the dawn of the 20th century.
And to trace the origin of that explosion, we have to look closely at the 19th century rupture known as the Second Great Awakening. And specifically, we have to analyze the profound influence of one man, Charles Grandison Finney.
Okay, let's unpack Charles Finney, because his DNA is in almost every church in America today.
It's unavoidable.
Finney was an incredibly persuasive Presbyterian minister in the 1800s. But the historical sources document that Finney took a sledgehammer to historic Calvinist orthodoxy.
He really did.
We need a quick Yale I-5 here. Historic Calvinism essentially believed that human beings are born spiritually dead. Not sick, not confused dead.
Like a corpse.
Right. Therefore, salvation requires God to sovereignly resurrect them, using the ordinary means to awaken the dead heart.
That's the orthodox view.
But Finney looked at that theology and threw it completely out the window.
He absolutely rejected it. You see, Finney was a lawyer before he was a minister, and he approached theology with a lawyer's pragmatism. He shifted his theological framework heavily toward Pelagianism.
Okay, define that for us.
Finney rejected the orthodox doctrine of total depravity. He argued that human beings were not spiritually dead corpses unable to respond. He believed humans were fully capable, moral agents who simply needed to be forcefully persuaded to bend their own free will and make the correct moral choice.
And this right here is the pivot point of American church history.
It really is the fulcrum.
Because if you change the underlying theology of what a human being is, you must necessarily change the methodology of how you reach them.
Exactly.
If you believe salvation is God miraculously raising the dead, your job is to preach the word faithfully, administer the sacraments, and wait patiently for God to act. You plod.
You plod, right.
But if you believe salvation is just getting a functional human being to make a rational, moral choice, well, patient proclamation is too slow.
You don't have time to wait for God.
No. You need to close the sale. You need psychological persuasion.
That is the exact pragmatic leap Finney made. The historical consensus that a human-centered theology of conversion inevitably demands human-centered methods of execution.
It makes sense.
If the goal is to break the human will, you need tools designed specifically to agitate and break the will. So Finney introduced a controversial system he proudly called his new measures.
The new measures.
These were not ordinary means instituted by Christ. They were extraordinary pragmatic techniques designed by Finney to manipulate the environment, heighten emotional distress, and force an immediate crisis of decision.
And the descriptions of these new measures are wild. We aren't talking about quiet prayer meetings.
Far from it.
Finney implemented highly theatrical preaching styles. He held protracted meetings that would go on for days or even weeks, basically exhausting the attendees physically and emotionally.
Just wearing them down.
Exactly. There were reports of people crying aloud, fainting, taking on bizarre physical postures. He used the prayer of faith, calling out specific sinners by name in public to shame them.
Imagine the peer pressure.
Unbelievable pressure. But the absolute crown jewel, the ultimate weapon in Finney's arsenal, was the anxious bench.
The anxious bench was exactly what you described at the beginning of our deep dive. It was a designated space, usually right at the front of the meeting hall, literally under the nose of the preacher.
Right in the splash zone.
Yes. Individuals who felt any internal conviction or fear regarding their soul were heavily pressured to leave the anonymity of the crowd and sit on this bench.
Which isolates them.
Exactly. Once there, they became the focal point of the entire room. They were subjected to intense public exhortation, direct censure, and an overwhelming amount of psychological and peer pressure to publicly break down and declare their conversion.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a moment here.
Please do.
When I analyze the mechanics of the anxious bench, it operates exactly like a modern high-pressure sales tactic.
Oh, 100%.
It's like walking into a timeshare presentation where they lock the doors, turn the temperature up, and barrage you until you sign the contract just to escape. Or it's like a modern social media algorithm perfectly engineered to trigger your outrage so you click the link.
It relies on the exact same psychological levers.
Right. It is undeniably manipulative.
Right.
However, if the stated goal of your organization is to get people to say yes to Jesus as fast as possible, the anxious bench is incredibly efficient.
It is very efficient.
It gets results. The numbers go up. So why do the confessional theologians view this era as a total catastrophe?
They view it as a catastrophe because it fundamentally corrupted the DNA of American Protestantism. Yes, it produced immediate visible numbers, but at a devastating long-term cost.
Okay, what was the cost?
Finney effectively transitioned the locus of spiritual power away from the objective channels instituted by God the Word and sacraments, and transferred it to the subjective entrepreneurial methods instituted by man.
He changed the source of the power.
Exactly. It turned the mysterious means of grace into mechanical instruments of psychological manipulation. The critique from historic theologians is that this shift hollowed out the church.
How so?
It produced generations of converts who were addicted to the adrenaline of the spectacular crisis, but possessed absolutely no spiritual endurance, theological depth, or ability to survive in the ordinary.
They were hooked on the sugar rush of the revival, but they had no actual nutrition.
That's a great way to put it.
And this massive shift did not go unchallenged. While Finney was packing tents and building his benches, a brilliant theologian named John Williamson Nevin launched what historians consider one of the most devastating, systematic critiques in the history of the American church.
Nevin was a formidable mind. He was a theologian of the German Reformed Church and the primary architect of what became known as the Mercersburg theology.
Which was what, basically?
It was essentially a robust attempt to retrieve historic, sacrament-rich Reformation theology in the face of frontier revivalism. In 1844, Nevin published a blistering tract titled simply, The Anxious Bench.
And he did not hold back.
He famously diagnosed Finney's entire methodology as spiritual quackery.
I mean, calling the most famous, successful revivalist of the 19th century a quack, a spiritual snake oil salesman, is unbelievably bold.
It was a necessary polemic for Nevin. He recognized that Finney's new measures were not just neutral tools that could be neatly separated from theology. The methods were the theology in action.
The medium is the message.
Precisely. To clarify the stakes, Nevin established a brilliant, devastating dichotomy between two irreconcilable paradigms. He categorized them as the system of the bench and the system of the Catechism.
Our sources provide a detailed breakdown of Nevin's dichotomy, and analyzing them side by side really exposes the fault lines of modern religion. Let's walk through this carefully.
Let's do it.
First, they differ entirely on the locus of authenticity, meaning where does the real spiritual action actually happen?
In the system of the bench, authenticity is entirely subjective and individualistic. It is located squarely within the fluctuating emotional state of the individual.
So it's all about how you feel.
Right. If you feel a burning crisis, it's real. If you don't, it's fake. In stark contrast, the system of the Catechism maintains that authenticity is objective and corporate.
Meaning it's outside of you.
Yes. It is located in the historic physical practices of the gathered church, the water, the bread, the proclaimed word, and it remains true regardless of your momentary emotional weather.
Okay, next is the view of conversion.
Yep.
The system of the bench treats conversion as a sudden, isolated, explosive moment of existential crisis. It's an earthquake.
Just a massive rupture.
And because it's so dramatic, that single moment is treated as the sum total of the gospel experience. The system of the Catechism, however, views conversion as a profound but ongoing reality.
It's a seed planted.
Exactly, a seed that requires patient perseverance, recognizing the essential role of the covenant community nurturing that life over a span of decades.
Which naturally dictates their view of the Christian life post-conversion. For the bench, everything leads up to the altar call. Once the crisis moment is achieved and the emotional peak is hit, the subsequent day-to-day development of the believer is often viewed as a secondary, less vital interest.
You got the yes, now move on to the next person.
Exactly. But for the Catechism, the Christian life is a lifelong, grueling, beautiful trajectory of growth. It is nurtured systematically through regular instruction, weekly communion, and ordinary disciplines.
And finally, Nevin looks at the nature of ministry itself. He observes that the system of the bench is inherently characterized by noise, parade, emotional manipulation, and the constant demand for surprising, headline-grabbing conversions.
It is fundamentally a spectacle.
It's a show. But the system of the Catechism is constant, regular, and earnest. Nevin uses this beautiful phrase. He says it operates silently and deeply like the common processes of nature.
Nevin's ultimate conclusion was that you cannot synthesize these two spirits. They are fundamentally at war with one another regarding the nature of God and humanity.
You have to choose.
And he issued a prophetic warning that whenever a church or an individual prefers the bench to the Catechism, it is always, invariably, a wretched choice.
And let's pause and think about the psychological toll of making that wretched choice.
Yeah.
Imagine you were raised entirely within the system of the bench.
Okay.
Your entire spiritual framework is built on achieving and maintaining an emotional crisis. What happens to your brain on the days you just feel normal?
You panic.
What happens when the revival adrenaline wears off and you are just doing laundry on a Tuesday afternoon or struggling to pay rent? Because you have been taught to equate the divine presence with an emotional spike. A normal Tuesday feels like a spiritual abandonment.
It's devastating.
You inevitably feel like a failure, or you feel like God has left you. Nevin saw perfectly that this system would leave generations of people deeply, chronically exhausted.
It is a perfect recipe for severe spiritual anxiety and burnout. And unfortunately, the tragedy documented in our sources is that the system of the bench did not die out in the 1800s.
It just got a makeover.
Exactly. The theological DNA of Finney's new measures simply adapted. It evolved seamlessly into the 20th and 21st centuries. It traded the literal wooden bench for better sound systems, smoke machines, and demographic marketing teams, becoming the engine of the modern church growth movement.
This evolution brings us into the modern legacy of pragmatism and radical restlessness. The historical critique argues that Finney's revivalism directly birthed the modern attractional or seeker-sensitive megachurch.
The underlying assumption of the modern attractional model is practically identical to Finney's. The historic ordinary means of grace are simply insufficient to capture the attention of a modern, secularized populace.
They're just too boring.
Right. The word and the sacraments are deemed too boring. Therefore, driven by pure pragmatism, many church leaders began systematically dismantling historic tradition, stripping away liturgy, and minimizing the sacraments in a frantic, highly calculated attempt to be culturally relevant and visually impressive.
It represents the ultimate shift in the core question a church asks itself when planning a service.
Yes, the foundational question.
Historically, a church looked at the Bible and asked, what has God ordained for his worship? But the modern pragmatic church looks at the culture and asks, what attracts? What is popular? What will go viral?
And the logical conclusion of asking what attracts is experience-oriented worship. It leads to multi-site video venues where the sermon is beamed in on a screen, removing the physical presence of the pastor.
It's like watching a movie.
It is. It leads to high-production programming designed specifically to cater to consumer preferences. The church effectively leans so hard toward the outsider that it treats the Sunday gathering as a massive weekly evangelistic production, rather than a covenantal gathering for the saints to receive their weekly medicine through the means of grace.
But here is where the sociological data completely shatters the illusion of this pragmatic success.
The data is really eye-opening.
The sources cite data analyzing the massive, exploding numbers of these attractional megachurches, and the data shows that the growth is largely a mirage.
It's not what it seems.
No, it's not actual organic conversion growth from unchurched people hearing the gospel. It is predominantly transfer growth.
Right.
The massive marketing budgets and professional light shows work brilliantly to draw a crowd, but they're mostly just draining smaller, ordinary congregations. They are reshuffling the deck of people who are already Christians, moving them from a boring church to an entertaining one.
It is a profound empirical indictment of the methodology. And the sources point out that even recent theological movements that attempted to correct this shallow pragmatism often failed because they couldn't cure the underlying addiction to the extraordinary.
Give us an example of that.
Well, the text analyzes the new Calvinism movement. Now, this movement successfully brought back serious, heavy expositional preaching. That was a positive shift.
Okay.
However, because much of the movement retained an allergy to historic confessionalism and robust sacramentology, it kept the culture of radical performance anxiety. Believers had deep theology, but they were still constantly stressed about whether they were living radical enough lives for the gospel.
They just swapped the emotional pressure for intellectual pressure.
Exactly.
The sources also analyze something called sonship theology. This was a movement designed specifically to help exhausted believers finally grasp the concept of grace.
Right, to find rest.
But the irony is tragic. To teach people about grace, it relied heavily on extraordinary high-intensity means like specialized weekend conferences, intensive emotional courses, and paradigm-shifting retreats, rather than simply driving people back to the quiet, ordinary, weekly rhythms of their local church.
We can't escape it.
We are so addicted to the extraordinary fix that we even try to use the extraordinary to cure our addiction to the extraordinary.
This relentless cycle of addiction is what the theologian Michael Horton diagnoses so incisively in our sources. Horton argues that this pressure cooker environment creates a profound theological sickness, a functional perfectionism.
Explain that.
When believers are unable to simply rest in the free, objective grace delivered through ordinary means, they inevitably seek validation from their peers. They are forced to live their lives entirely for the applause of others, constantly trying to prove their radical devotion.
Horton's specific diagnosis of how we view ambition completely stopped me in my tracks.
It's a hard truth.
He talks about the modern deification of ambition. In the modern evangelical subculture, and really in corporate culture at large, ambition has been baptized as a supreme virtue.
Oh, absolutely.
You are commanded to have a massive, audacious vision for your life, your ministry, your startup. Pastors are incentivized to use their smaller, ordinary churches as mere stepping stones to achieve gospel celebrity status, write bestsellers, and speak at conferences.
The hustle culture of religion.
Right. But Horton points out a devastating biblical reality. In the New Testament, specifically in James chapter 3, selfish ambition is explicitly categorized as a demonic vice.
It's not a compliment in the text?
Not at all. Its ultimate trajectory is the glory of the self. not the glory of God. We've taken a literal vice, rebranded it, and turned it into this central driving engine of our religious and cultural machinery.
It is a striking and deeply necessary historical corrective. When you become obsessed with proving your own radicality, you inherently position yourself as the star of your own epic movie.
Right.
And when you are the star, everyone else in your life, your spouse, your children, your neighbors, is necessarily reduced to a supporting role, or worse, a prop in your story of greatness.
Wow.
And structurally, the sources highlight one of the most damaging, tragic manifestations of this obsession with the epic, the generational segregation of youth in the modern church.
This is where the structural damage becomes visible. Because the modern church is terrified of losing young people to a highly entertaining secular culture. They try to compete using these epic, high-energy experiences.
And to do this, they completely segregate the generations.
Let's trace the hypothetical life cycle of a kid in this system.
Let's hear it.
They start in a highly produced, hyper-stimulating church nursery. Then they graduate to a high-octane children's ministry with video games and laser tag.
Keeps them busy.
Then they move into a rock concert youth group with a charismatic youth pastor. Finally, they hit a specialized, peer-only college ministry.
A completely controlled environment.
Yes, it is now entirely possible for a person to spend the first 22 years of their life in a church building without ever once actually integrating into the intergenerational, boring, ordinary life of the actual congregation.
They're completely isolated from the weathered wisdom of older generations. They're surrounded exclusively by peers who are under the exact same crushing pressure to leave a mark and be radical.
They never see the plotting.
Never. They never experience the true plotting reality of ordinary church membership. So the inevitable question is, what happens when they graduate?
Right.
What happens when they enter the mundane, unglamorous reality of adult life? When they have to pay a mortgage, when they have a colicky baby, when they face a routine medical scare?
Their faith shatters. The high-energy smoke machine system did not equip them with the infrastructure to survive an ordinary painful Tuesday.
It just couldn't.
The medicine they were given was pure adrenaline, and when the adrenaline runs out, they assume God has vanished. Consequently, the sociological data shows they frequently abandon the faith entirely. It's a devastating, entirely predictable cycle.
The epic church is leaving people exhausted, restless, and ultimately spiritually hollow.
So if that is the diagnosis, if the system of the bench and the deification of ambition have poisoned the well, what is the alternative? How do we detox from this radical restlessness?
We have to find a way out.
This brings us to our final synthesis, which draws heavily from Michael Horton's appropriately titled book, Ordinary.
The antidote, according to Horton and the chorus of historic texts we've reviewed today, is a conscious, intentional return to the historic, ordinary means of grace.
Just going back to the basics.
It is a recovery of the foundational belief that God accomplishes the most extraordinary, supernatural feat imaginable, which is resurrecting a dead human heart and making the ungodly godly through the profoundly boring channels of preaching, baptism, the Lord's Supper, and prayer.
I want to spend some time on the central metaphor Horton uses to explain this shift, because it perfectly captures the difference in these worldviews. He contrasts two distinct models for how we view growth: the factory versus the garden.
It's a brilliant comparison.
The modern pragmatic church, built on Finney's DNA, operates exactly like an industrial factory. A factory is obsessed with immediate, standardized, hyper-efficient, measurable output.
They measure everything.
You put the raw human material on the conveyor belt, you pull the levers of the anxious bench, you adjust the lighting, you play the right chord progression, and you pump out a visible, immediate conversion on the other side.
It's entirely mechanistic. But when you look at how Christ actually describes the kingdom of God in his parables, he never uses industrial or mechanistic imagery. He uses agricultural imagery. The kingdom is a garden. It is a mustard seed. And a garden operates on a completely different timeline.
A much slower one.
It grows slowly. It grows imperceptibly. You cannot force a tomato plant to sprout overnight just by yelling at it or shining a massive spotlight on it or playing emotional music at it.
Exactly. A garden requires daily, boring, utterly mundane tending. You have to get on your knees and weed it. You have to water it. You have to endure the changing seasons. Most importantly, you have to wait.
Waiting is the hardest part.
It is. The historical critique asserts that deep-rooted, resilient disciples are simply not manufactured through rapid, sensational 6-week programs. Those programs might produce a quick emotional sprout, a flash in the pan, but because it has no root system, it withers the second the scorching heat of real life hits it.
It can't survive the sun.
No. True, unbreakable depth is forged only over decades of quiet, consistent intake of the Bible, prayer, and preaching, all within the messy, unglamorous context of an ordinary local church community.
And embracing this garden metaphor does something incredible to the human psyche. It fundamentally reorients a person's posture toward the world.
How so?
This is where Horton introduces a brilliant, liberating concept called extroverted piety.
Extroverted piety.
When you finally realize and truly trust that Christ has committed to delivering his grace through these external, objective, ordinary means, you are immediately liberated from the suffocating pressure to perform. You find a deep, lasting contentment.
Let's break that down. If my piety, my religious devotion is introverted, it means I am constantly looking inward.
Staring at your own navel.
Right. I am anxiously monitoring my own emotional temperature. I'm taking my spiritual pulse every 5 minutes to see if I am feeling radical enough or if I wept enough during the worship song.
It's exhausting.
But extroverted piety means that because I am resting securely in the objective infrastructure of the Word and sacraments, the city water grid we talked about, I don't have to obsess over myself anymore. My devotion can finally turn outward.
Precisely. You are freed from the narcissistic need to use your neighbors, your spouse, your children, or your local church as a project to build your own spiritual resume.
They aren't props anymore.
You don't need them to be part of your epic story. You can finally just love them and serve them as they are. You can be fully present in your ordinary daily vocations, whether you are a plumber, a teacher, or an accountant, without demanding that those vocations be historically monumental.
You're finally free to just be kind to your spouse on Wednesday morning and let that be enough.
And that is a beautiful thing.
It is.
Yeah.
And it all ties beautifully back to the beginning of our deep dive. The historical sources are making a critical, nuanced point here. The call to embrace the ordinary is absolutely not a call to mediocrity.
Not at all.
It is not a theological excuse to be lazy or complacent. Think about how excellence is achieved in literally any other field of human endeavor. If you look at an elite Olympic athlete, a master architect, or a brilliant classical musician, how did they achieve true jaw-dropping excellence?
It certainly wasn't through attending one radical, highly emotional weekend seminar.
Exactly. It was forged in the dark. It was forged through daily, agonizing, unglamorous faithfulness to the fundamental disciplines of their craft.
The repetition.
The athlete woke up at 4 a.m. every single day to run drills when nobody was watching. The musician played the same scales 10,000 times. They embraced the boring repetition. In Carey's words, they plodded.
The exact same principle applies in the spiritual realm. The church history we've reviewed suggests that the super apostles, the loud innovators, and the modern gospel celebrities are neither necessary nor helpful for producing deep faith.
They might even be a distraction.
Often they are. What is urgently required is the quiet courage to practice the right use of the ordinary means of grace with steadfast continuity over a long period of time. By discovering a fondness for the familiar and cultivating a sense of wonder for the mundane, the church paradoxically recovers the true transformative power of the extraordinary.
What an incredible sweeping journey this has been today. We started by looking back at the ancient catechisms and the fiery reformers like Luther and Calvin, who fought tooth and nail to anchor the fragile human heart in the objective physical realities of the Word and the sacraments.
Protecting people from both the automated magic of Rome and the chaotic storms of their own emotions.
We examined the Puritans, who held such a terrifying reverence for the preached Word that they organized their entire society around getting a double dose of it every Sunday.
We then analyzed the devastating rupture of the 19th century, where Charles Finney's pragmatism and the psychological pressure of the anxious bench traded theological depth for immediate, measurable results.
We saw how the focus shifted entirely from God's ordinary, objective means to man's subjective, manipulative measures.
We explored John Williamson Nevin's profound prophetic warning that elevating the bench over the Catechism will inevitably destroy the spiritual endurance of a people.
And we traced that specific pragmatic DNA right up to the present moment. We looked at the exhausting, mirage-like reality of the modern megachurch, where the relentless pressure to be radical and the tragic deification of ambition has left a generation of believers, especially the youth, burned out, cynical, and segregated from the wisdom they need to survive.
That's a sobering reality.
The overarching takeaway from synthesizing all these historical texts is a profound, life-altering sigh of relief. True, Lasting transformation does not require you to manufacture a radical emotional crisis before breakfast.
You don't have to force it.
It doesn't require you to sit in the hot seat of an anxious bench and perform for the crowd. It simply requires the courage to plod, to be present in the slow growth of the garden, and to trust the ordinary objective means that have quietly sustained the faithful for centuries.
It is a profound paradigm shift. It replaces the exhausting anxiety of constant performance with the deep peace of divine provision. The history shows us that the ordinary is not the enemy of the extraordinary. Rather, it is the very soil in which the extraordinary is able to take root and grow.
And that brings us right back to where we started. That feeling of deep exhaustion when you look at your phone, look at the culture, and feel the crushing demand to be epic.
We all feel it.
We've spent a lot of time today talking about how this historical shift from the ordinary to the spectacular derailed our spiritual and theological lives. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day, building on the psychological mechanisms we've unpacked.
It's a crucial application.
Take a hard look around at the rest of your life. Where else in your career trajectory, in your marriage, in your parenting style, or in your personal fitness goals are you constantly exhausting yourself on the anxious bench of instant, dramatic results?
Where are you rushing the process?
Right. Where are you demanding an explosive, paradigm-shifting breakthrough from yourself or the people you love, when what you actually need is the quiet, daily, unglamorous persistence of a garden?
That is the essential question we all have to answer.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.